Hello. Thanks to anyone who has the time to join with me today. My name's Dav, or at least that's my pseudonym, and I talk about American politics. I've been talking about America's descent into fascism for some time, and today the topic is collaborators, and not just why do some people become collaborators, but what stops some people from being attracted to collaborating with a tyrannical, kleptocratic, and criminal regime. What stops those people? How do we make more of them? So we're going to listen to one guy who was a hero, who sheltered protesters in his house last night, who invited them in, even as the police were shepherding protesters, kettling them, I believe is the term used, when you tear gas and use rubber bullets on people to corral them in an area from which they cannot escape, and then try to mass arrest them. Hi, Alan. Thanks for joining me. So the first thing I'm doing, though, is quickly looking at a piece by Anne Applebaum, who writes for The Atlantic. And the headline she went with was, "History will judge the complicit." It's a great one, because you'll see a lot of people on the internet today saying, hallelujah, people are finally using language, at least on Twitter, at least you have some verified blue check marks, finally denouncing Trump's Republican Party and Trump's administration as of a fascist nature, that they've abandoned the constitutional rights of Americans to treat the First Amendment as if it doesn't exist, to use the military to intimidate protesters, to have low-flying helicopters and Black Hawks flying low over protesters in the DC area to intimidate people out of using their First Amendment protected rights to speak out, to speak against the government if they so choose. Trump and the Republican Party and their collaborators in Fox News are obviously on a pathway to falsely conflating property damage with speaking out. Now, sometimes we have debates over, is property destruction a form of speaking out when you feel that people of your demographic group are being looted in terms of having their lives stolen from them with impunity, that there's no legal consequences for killing Black people in public when they haven't committed a crime. And in any case, if they have, the punishment should not be death on the scene at the hands of police officers. But moving aside from that for the moment, today's not the day to say, yes, we told you so. Today's the day to say, okay, if we're broadening the pool of people who recognize the danger America is in, that its system of government has been corrupted, that its democracy has been effectively overturned, and that the path forward does not necessarily lend itself to easy removal of a tumorous despot who has corrupted and hollowed out democratic institutions and methods of checks and balances. Anne highlights some points. She goes through some case stories of two different men who were part of the German Communist Party, and one called Wolfgang Leonard. He came to question his communist convictions because someone who'd come over from the West, who was new, who was a communist as well, who was like, okay, cool, can you show me the way to the dining room, please? And Wolfgang Leonard had to explain that there were different dining rooms depending on what pass you had. And the man was like, oh, but isn't everybody a member of the party? Because, you know, if you're just new to coming over to communist Germany, you might have that youthful idealism, even if you're older, fresh idealism. And Wolfgang Leonard, that started in him a thought process of saying, oh, yes, why are there different dining rooms? This dining room, you get a 3-course meal with a silver setting and etc. Is that a betrayal of our ideology? Is that a betrayal of our ethical system that we have purported communism to be? That started in process for him, a train of thought that lasted for some time and picked up steam. For him to be able to question the party and its ideals meant that he questioned whether he belonged there, and he eventually was able to escape from communist Germany. he realized that communist Germany was in fact an occupied vassal state of Soviet communists, the Communist Soviet Republic. And then he had a best friend who also realized that, yes, the Communist Party was corrupt, but embraced it nevertheless and enjoyed the opportunity to rise up higher and higher through the Communist Party. So she came down to the case of America and said, we've got Lindsey Graham on the one hand, who initially denounced Trump, said that he was, let's find out how the quote she used. Oh, that's Leonard, Wolfgang Leonard, and that's his best friend who was both parts of the East German elite. And Leonard went to America and became a very popular lecturer at Yale with a course on communism. And Wolf rose to become its top spy. So can you see the brutality in the face of Marcus Wolf on the right? And the sort of kind, well, maybe we're projecting, but the kindness and the smile that you at least think you can see in the photograph of the man on the left. Okay, we're looking for Lindsey Graham. Okay, oh yes, Lindsey Graham said that being in the military, the Air Force has been one of the best things that ever happened to me. It gave me a purpose bigger than myself. It put me in the company of patriots. That sounds very patriotic, doesn't it? Lindsey Graham likes belonging to things bigger than himself. Mitt Romney, on the other hand, became a venture capitalist, bought companies, fired people, streamlined companies and resold them for profit, was very good at doing that, became very rich. They both ran for president at various times. Let's have a look. Okay, so Lindsey Graham, before the 2016 election, Graham called him a jackass, a nutjob, and a race-baiting, xenophobic religious bigot. He seemed unhappy, even depressed by the election. I happened to see him at a conference, Anne writes, in Europe in the spring of 2016, and he spoke in monosyllables, if at all. It's Eric. And there's Tammy. People are frightened. They're saying that Trump has to go. Yes, that would be great. But I'm going through this collaborator thing because this is a game of maths right now. We are trying to add to the number of people who recognize what Trump is. And we've been doing this task for a while. And we're trying to roll with current events as well, so that when there's an event that helps people understand the nature of Trumpism, and it's the fact that it's antithetical to democracy and to good governance and safe governance. And then there's people who are collaborators, because whether or not they have been extorted into it, or whether they're attracted to power, or whether they just tend to be passive people who don't want to rock the status quo. So we're thinking about what makes those two people, and how can we be the irritant, the grain of sand in an oyster that helps produce more people who reject being collaborators. You have to come to a point where you realize collaboration is the default stance for a lot of people. It's easier. It feels natural if you watch Fox News to believe that there's no reason to protest. We can't just always run with our negative stereotypes. So we still keep our eyes out, and we look to people for instances of heroism and leadership. And some of us find it. I sometimes lose a little patience with people who just say, no, police officers are always bad. They don't care about any police officers standing up. We need to care about that, because we need hearts and minds, and we need to recognize that racism is a continuum. It's not two sides and you just pick a side. There's people who are close to coming to our side, and we need to find ways to hold out our hands and say, join us. We need the weight of your numbers, because social context and social pressure makes you have more people. And fascism cannot flourish in a whole country if there's not enough collaborators to keep the country running. If everybody's starting to go, this dude is not competent to run the country. The country is on fire, and it's not just evil people looting, or it's It's decent people, outraged decent people protesting in the streets, in part, and some agitators, many of whom have been linked to right-wing domestic terrorist groups. And I finally found an explanation for Electric Boogaloo that I can retain. The Boogaloo, who are sort of white supremacists and primarily just agitators who want to accelerate a war so that they can be the ones least caught off guard. It's from the fact that the sequel to Breaking 2, Electric Boogaloo, was so famous that it became something used to mock people. And when people on Twitter were joking about how there was going to be a new civil war last year, they said Civil War 2, Electric Boogaloo. So it was a riff on the premise that this one particular movie sequel had been so bad. So a bit random, difficult for me to remember that explanation, but I've remembered it now. This is why they're called the Boogaloo. They enjoy humor, but a lot of them are also just stupid people who want to be validated through war. Freud called it thanatos, the longing for death, but it's sometimes pursuit of meaning and significance. And if you go down as a glorious warrior in your own mind, getting to use your arsenal of expensive weaponry, then you have acquired significance and validation. If you're so angry and you're frightened, you build alliances. Look, there's a little book called On Tyranny, 20 Lessons from the 20th Century by Timothy Snyder. And the chapter headings might give you some tips. Make eye contact and small talk. So stay human, humanize other people. Learn from peers in other countries. Be wary of paramilitaries, yes. It says be reflective if you must be armed. Let's have a look at what that says. If you carry a weapon in public service, may God bless you and keep you, but know that evils of the past involved policemen and soldiers finding themselves one day doing irregular things. Be ready to say no. Well, some people have been saying no, and we're going to look at that today. There's footage of a policeman that's been taken down, but people captured that footage, and he was saying that the George Floyd murder was horrific and antithetical to what good policing is about. So it's not an ideal response in that it's still sort of minimizing George Floyd's death as if it was a rare exception. And it was rare in that it was so clear and such undeniably murder in the first degree, and that there were clearly collaborating police officers as well who were either looking out for people to keep people away so that they couldn't help save Floyd's life, and other police officers also kneeling on Floyd's back and legs. And the independent autopsy revealed that, yes, Floyd died of asphyxiation, the deprivation of blood flow to the brain, leading to a lack of oxygen, and that there was also pressure on Floyd's lungs. So his lungs were being constricted because he was being pushed into the ground. But that position also lends itself to asphyxiation, being on the ground with your hands behind your back. Already lends itself to asphyxiation. So to be kept in that pose for 9 minutes, but then also have a knee on your neck, he had no chance of surviving that encounter. So it wasn't an accident, it wasn't inadvertent, it was murder. And people are not just protesting that George Floyd was murdered, they are protesting that there are still 3 other policemen roaming free, and that the judicial system has not yet intervened to say, you need to be under arrest. Because even if you didn't directly murder George Floyd, you stood by and observed it happen. You were colleagues of the police officer with his knee on someone's neck. But from the autopsy report, we can also say that those police officers were likely to have physically contributed to Floyd's death. Someone's saying FHP took a knee with protesters. What's FHP, please? You're having a bad day, Tammy? Tell me about it. I've decided this is not just a news program. I've always decided that, but some days it's clearer to me than others. This is not a news program. I don't expect people just to watch. I actually expect people to volunteer if they think that this is a good idea, if they think that what I'm saying has truth to it. I expect people to brainstorm ideas, not just to listen to me. I expect people to speak up about what topics they want to pick, what activities they want to do. So if you want to volunteer to, research a topic, to maybe write a pamphlet yourself for circulation, I'll help you edit anything you write. If you write a letter, I'll help you. You can send it to me and I'll help you edit it. I'll help you if you think you need to add to a script, if you've written a script to call local authorities to add to the pressure for the 3 other officers to be charged in relation to Floyd's murder. This is supposed to be an action station. Okay, Florida Highway Patrol Chief. That's excellent. Because I've seen so far the Flint, Michigan sheriff who took off his riot gear and walked with the protesters. Yes, well, the police officers have all been fired that were involved in falsifying the report on Floyd's death, because there were 4 of them, so I presume that they worked on that report. I know what people on the right are sometimes afraid of. I know they're afraid of disliking themselves because they're white. And I find that a bit relatable today, because I'm looking at my own white skin and going, yep, they don't want civilization to lose strength or self-confidence, because you start to go, yes, look at the crimes of conquest, look at the crimes of colonialization, look at the difficulties humans have of shedding an outlook that involves subordinating other people on the basis of an arbitrary racial construct. And it hurts to be part of that. I know that pain more vividly today because an Australian police officer was also videotaped. An Aboriginal teenager swore at the police officer and made a violent threat. He said something like, "I'll bash ya." And the police officer put the 14-year-old's hands behind his back and then used his legs to trip him up so that the restrained 14-year-old fell very fast, face forward onto the paved sidewalk, chipping his teeth, bruising his shoulder, leaving him just screaming in pain, face down on the sidewalk. And the noises he made were very animalistic, and that was captured on video. And then I was like, oh, that makes it a little bit easier for me today to relate to white people's pain in America, that it is just shameful to be associated with a skin color of someone that does that to people and has so little control over themselves that their temper causes them to expose other people to potential death in that way. I mean, if you tip somebody face forward onto a hard surface, you're potentially causing them to gain a head injury and potentially even die. So this 14-year-old didn't die, but it feels awful. It feels awful. And I imagine people watching the protest footage and footage of police turned violent on Twitter would have some concerns. Now, it's interesting because if you watch Fox News, you're not going to be seeing any of the footage of police violence. You're just going to be seeing footage of looting and destruction to property storefronts, and you're going to be saying, well, that's clearly the least desirable outcome in the world, property damage. And you're not really going to be registering the fact that African American people are not protected by that same shield of excuses that you, the Fox viewer, might use to lie to yourself. And in each case of Black deaths in custody, you say, oh, there was a reason, they didn't comply, they were committing a crime. You can see it. If you interact with any conservative accounts on Twitter, you can see that in every case, they have a rationalization. They'll say, well, George Floyd didn't really die of asphyxiation. He had drugs in his system. And the people who didn't find that, well, that was a family purchased autopsy, so it has no relevance to anything. It is just a constant series of excuses and fabrications and distortions of truth. So those people can keep pretending to themselves that there is no valid reason to protest, and there's no valid reason to be enraged to the point of wanting to end the social contract, that they feel it's so unfair to pay taxes for public services such as a police force when they don't expect police to protect them. They expect police to fail them and to potentially attack them and murder their friends or family members or themselves. Someone wanted to know what Obama was doing, and Obama published a piece on Medium yesterday. He's saying that alongside of protest, it's very important to take voting seriously and to register to vote and to vote in all manner of elections, that local police officers are sometimes elected. Are they elected? Americans must love electing things. Or that oversight boards are sometimes the product of mayors who are elected. So Obama knows that very keenly because he was betrayed by the Democrats who failed to turn up to midterm elections, who failed to vote him in a Congress that would support his endeavors and not racistly, purposefully sabotage any and everything that he was trying to accomplish for Americans. And that then he had to deal with the outrage of people on the left who felt betrayed, that as president, he couldn't just wave a magic wand, or he couldn't have the kind of supreme executive power that they wanted him to have, that they thought, yes, we put you in power, now fix everything, Obama. You didn't, you bad man, you overpromised and underdelivered. And he did promise big, he promised hope, and it was hard to deliver hope when voters didn't turn out in the numbers that were needed to counter enthusiastic Republican voters who wanted to minimize taxes, but also to keep down a Black American president. Democratic voters needed to have Obama's back, and they didn't. We have to get out of this bad habit of just saying Congress to intervene. Congress is no longer Congress. Congress is normal politicians, i.e. Democrats, sometimes imperfect, sometimes overly passive, and then Republicans who appear to be a compromised political party that have abandoned democracy and are fully in support of whatever measures Trump takes to derail the functioning of normal democratic measures and normal democratic institutions, and may instead escalate the situation until he can cheerfully say with a pretense of decency that he just has to cancel the election because there's too much civil war happening in the United States. Today you have primary voting. Oh, I wonder which state you have primary voting in. Yes, competent government would be nice, and Biden does have a 10-point advantage in the most recent surveys. I block communists, sorry to say, but I feel that communism is not useful in this time and place. So yes, I do realize that America's democracy has been perverted by Donald Trump, and so strictly speaking, a lot of the checks and balances are no longer functional. The Senate Republicans proved that, not Congress. Senate Republicans proved that when they violated norms of trials and they refused to have witnesses at Donald Trump's impeachment trial in the Senate. That was a violation of the Constitution, of the checks and balances enshrined in the Constitution to keep America from being perverted by corruption. and its political system from being perverted by somebody who would cheat and lie and attempt to gain advantage by abusing his power as president to try and get foreign governments to help run duplicitous campaign ads for him by helping to fabricate accusations to be made against Joe Biden. Yes, if we have any moderators, I'm cheerfully happy to block that person. America is an imperfect democracy, and its imperfections are threatening to completely derail its democracy at present. But if you want to say it's never been a democracy, it has. Its flaws have been more damaging at some times rather than others. Black people were able to vote in the Reconstruction period, and then white people rioted and killed some of the black legislators and scared off some of the others after they'd killed some. But black people were elected to Congress before black people more recently won the vote in the civil rights movement. Biden's addressing the public right now. Oh, well, then I better not compete with Joe Biden. So I'll get off the broadcast. I will. I'll watch it with you. Oh, do you want me to play it live? Can I play it live? You stream it. He just wrapped up. Okay. So Biden's gone on YouTube. Play it live. Okay. How can I play it live? Maybe. I can go to YouTube and open a screen. Okay. Let's do that. I'm glad it was an amazing speech. We really need unity. Okay, bear with me. Just okay. Okay. Let's click Joe. What shall I use to search for the Joe Biden speech? Joe Biden. Live now. Okay. All right, and then we click on share screen. Somebody just said, "What up, homie?" to me. All right. And we'll click at the beginning. And seems to be loading. So we'll watch. Play.
Welcome to Late Night. Today, the president reeled off an unhinged rant in the call.
That's not what I want.
Greetings.
Okay.
I can't breathe. I can't breathe. George Floyd's last words, but they didn't die with him. They're still being heard, echoing all across this nation. They speak to a nation where too often just the color of your skin puts your life at risk. They speak to a nation where more than 100,000 people have lost their lives to a virus and 40 million have filed for unemployment, with a disproportionate number of those deaths and job losses concentrated in Black and brown communities. And they speak to a nation where every day millions of people, millions, not at the moment of losing their life, but in the course of living their life, are saying to themselves, "I can't breathe." It's a wake-up call to our nation, in my view. It's for all of us, and I mean all of us. It's not the first time we've heard those words. They're the same words we heard from Eric Garner when his life was taken away 6 years ago. But it's time to listen to those words, to try to understand them, to respond to them, respond with action. A country is crying out for leadership. Leadership that can unite us, leadership that brings us together, leadership that can recognize pain and deep grief of communities that have had a knee on their neck for a long time. There's no place for violence, no place for looting or destroying property or burning churches or destroying businesses, many of them built by the very people of color who for the first time in their lives are beginning to realize their dreams and build wealth for their families. Nor is it acceptable for our police, sworn to protect and serve all people, to escalate tension, resort to excessive violence. We need to distinguish between legitimate peaceful protests and opportunistic violent destruction. We have to be vigilant about the violence that's being done by this incumbent president to our economy and to the pursuit of justice. When peaceful protesters dispersed in order for a president from the doorstep of the people's house, the White House, using tear gas and flash grenades in order to stage a photo op in one of the most historic churches in the country, or at least in Washington, D.C. We can be forgiven for believing the president is more interested in power than in principle. We're interested in serving the passions of his base and the needs of the people in his care. For that's what the presidency is, the duty to care for all of us, not just those who vote for us, but all of us, not just our donors, but all of us. The president held up the Bible at St. John's Church yesterday. I just wish he opened it once in a while instead of brandishing it. If he opened it, he could have learned something. They're all called to love one another as we love ourselves. It's really hard work, but it's the work of America. Donald Trump isn't interested in doing that work. Instead, he's preening and sweeping away all the guardrails that have long protected our democracy, guardrails that have helped make possible this nation's path to a more perfect union, a union that constantly requires reform and rededication. And yes, the protest from voices that are mistreated, ignored, left out, or left behind. But it is a union worth fighting for. And that's why I'm running for president. In addition to the Bible, the president might also want to open the U.S. Constitution once in a while. If he did, he'd find a thing called the First Amendment. And what it says in the beginning, it says, the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition their government for redress of grievances. That's kind of an essential notion built into this country. Mr. President, that's America. That's America. No horses rising up on their hind legs to push back peaceful protest. Not using the American military to move against the American people. This is a nation of values. Our freedom to speak is a cherished knowledge that lives inside every American almost from the time you're a kid. We're not allow any president to quiet our voice. We won't let those who see this as an opportunity to sow chaos throw up a smokescreen to distract us from very real and legitimate grievances at the heart of these protests. We can't leave this moment. Can't leave this moment thinking that we can once again turn away and do nothing. Can't do that this time. Just can't. The moment has come for our nation to deal with systemic racism, to deal with the growing economic inequity that exists in our nation, to deal with the denial of the promise of this nation, made to so many. You know, I've said from the outset of this election that we're in the battle for the soul of this nation. We are in the battle for the soul of this nation. we believe, maybe most importantly, who we want to be. It's all at stake. That's truer today than it's ever been, at least in my lifetime. And it's this urgency, it's in this urgency we can find a path forward. You know, the history of this nation teaches us that in some of our darkest moments of despair, we've made some of our greatest progress. Some of our darkest moments. 13th, 14th, 15th Amendments followed the Civil War. The greatest economic growth in world history grew out of the Great Depression. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 65 came in the tracks of Bull Connor's vicious dogs. To paraphrase Reverend Barber, it's the morning where we find hope. It's in the morning where we find hope when we mourn. But it's going to take more than talk. We had talk before. We've had protests before. We've got to now vow to make this at least an era of action and reverse the systemic racism with the long overdue concrete changes. The action will not be completed in the first 100 days of my presidency if I'm fortunate enough to be elected, or even in my entire term. It's going to take the work of a generation. But if this agenda will take time to complete, it should not wait for the first 100 days of my presidency to get started. A down payment on what is long overdue should come now, should come immediately. I call on the Congress to act this month on measures that will be the first step in this direction, starting with real police reform. Congressman Jeffries has a bill to outlaw chokeholds. Congress should put it on the president's desk in the next few days. There are other measures to stop transferring weapons of war to police forces, improve oversight and accountability, to create a model use of force standard. That also should be made law this month. No more excuses, no delays. If Mitch McConnell can bring in the United States Senate to confirm Trump's unqualified judicial nominees who will run roughshod over our Constitution now, it's time to pass legislation that will give true meaning to our constitutional promise of equal protection under the law. Looking ahead in the first 100 days of my presidency, I've committed to creating a National Police Oversight Commission. I've long believed we need real community policing. We need each and every police department of the country to understand a comprehensive review of undertake a comprehensive review of their hiring, their training, their de-escalation. Some have already done it, some are in the process of doing it. The federal government should give the cities and states the tools and the resources they need to implement reforms. More police officers meet the higher standards of their profession. Most of them do it. All the more reason why bad cops should be dealt with severely and swiftly. We all need to take a hard look at the culture that allows for the senseless tragedies that keep happening. And we need to learn from the cities and the precincts that are getting it right. We know, though, in order to have true American justice, we need economic justice as well. Here, too, there's much to be done. As an immediate step, Congress should act now to rectify racial inequities that allow COVID-19 recovery funds to be diverted from where they live. I'll be setting forth my agenda on economic justice and opportunity in the weeks and months ahead, but it begins with health care. Health care should be a right, not a privilege. The quickest route to universal coverage in this country is to expand on Obamacare. We could do it, we should do it. But this president, even now, in the midst of a public health crisis with massive unemployment, wants to destroy it. He doesn't care how many millions of Americans will be hurt, because he's consumed with his blinding ego when it comes to Barack Obama, President Obama. The president should withdraw his lawsuit to strike down Obamacare, and the Congress should prepare to pass the act I propose to expand Obamacare to millions more so everyone's covered. These last few months, we've seen America's true heroes. healthcare workers, docs, nurses, delivery truck drivers, grocery store workers. You know, we've come up with a new phrase for them: essential workers. Essential workers. So we need to do more than praise them. We need to pay them. We need to pay them. Because if it weren't clear before, it's clear now. This country wasn't built by Wall Street bankers and CEOs. It was built by the great American middle class, which was built by unions and our essential workers. You know, I know there's enormous fear and uncertainty and anger in the country. I understand. I know so many Americans are suffering loss of a loved one, suffering economic hardship, wondering, can I feed my family tomorrow? It's going to happen. Suffering under the weight of a generation after generation after generation of hurt inflicted on people of color, Black, brown, and Native communities in particular. Like many of you, I know what it means to grieve. My losses are not the same as losses felt by so many, but I know what it feels like when you think you can't go on. I know what it means to have that black hole in your chest where your grief is being sucked into it. Just a few days ago marked the 5th anniversary of my son Bo's passing. Cancer. And there's still moments when the pain is so great it feels no different than the day I sat in that bed as he passed away. But I also know that the best way to bear loss and pain is to turn it into that anger and anguish into purpose. And Americans know what our purpose is as a nation. It has to be guided. It has to be guided. It's guided us from the very beginning. You know, it's been reported the day that President John F. Kennedy was assassinated, little Yolanda King came home from school in Atlanta and jumped in her daddy's arms and said, "Oh, Daddy," she said, "now we're never going to get our freedom." Her daddy was reassuring, strong, and brave. He said, "No, don't worry, baby. It's going to be okay. It's going to be all right."
I'll restart the stream, okay? Oh, it's good now? All right.
Amid the violence and fear, Dr. King persevered. He was driven by his dream of a nation where justice runs down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Then, 1968, hate cut him down in Memphis. 2 days before Dr. King was murdered, he gave a final Sunday sermon in Washington, where he told us that though the arc of the moral universe is long, he said it bends towards justice. And we know we can bend it because we have. We have to believe that still. That's our purpose. It's been our purpose in the very beginning. To become a nation where all men and women are not only created equal, but they're treated equally. Not just created equal, but treated equally. To become a nation defined in Dr. King's words, not only by the absence of tension, but by the presence of justice. It's not enough just to not attention, but justice. Today in America, it's hard to keep faith that justice is at hand. I know that. You know that. Pain is raw. Pain is real. The President of the United States must be part of the solution, not the problem. But this president today is part of the problem and accelerates it. When he tweeted the words, "When the looting starts, the shooting starts," they weren't the words of the president. They were words of a racist Miami police chief in the 60s. When he tweeted that protesters, quote, would have been greeted with the most vicious dogs, when people would have been really hurt, end of quote. They weren't the words of a president. They were the kind of words Bull Connor would have used unleashing his dogs on innocent women and children. You know, the American story is a story about action and reaction. That's how history works. We can't be naive about it. I wish I could say that hate began with Donald Trump and will end with him. It didn't, and it won't. American history isn't a fairy tale with a guaranteed happy ending. The battle for the soul of this nation has been a constant push and pull for more than 240 years. A tug of war between the American ideal that we're all created equal and the harsh reality that racism has long torn us apart. The honest truth is that both elements are part of the American character. Both elements. At our best, the American ideal wins out. But it's never a rout. It's always a fight, and the battle is never fully won. But we can't ignore the truth that we're at our best when we open our hearts rather than clench our fists. Donald Trump has turned this country into a battlefield riven by old resentments and fresh fears. He thinks division helps him. His narcissism has become more important than the nation's well-being that he leads. I ask every American, I mean this to the bottom of my heart, I ask every American, look at where we are now and think anew. Is this who we are? Is this who we want to be? Is this what we want to pass on to our children and our grandchildren? Fear, anger, finger pointing, rather than the pursuit of happiness, incompetence and anxiety, self-absorption, selfishness? Or do we want to be the America we know we can be? The America we know in our hearts we could be and should be. Look, I look at the presidency as a very big job, and nobody will get it right every time. And I won't either. But I promise you this, I won't traffic in fear and division. I won't fan the flames of hate. I'll seek to heal the racial wounds that have long plagued our country, not use them for political gain. I'll do my job and I will take responsibility. I won't blame others. I'll never forget. I will never forget. I promise you, this job is not about me. It's about you. It's about us. I work not only to rebuild the nation, but to build it better than it was. We're the only nation in the world that goes through crisis and comes out better. To build a better future. That's what America does, to build a better future. We build the future. It may, in fact, be the most American thing to do, build the future. We hunger for liberty, the way Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass did. We thirst for the vote, like Susan B. Anthony and Ella Baker and John Lewis did. We strive to explore the stars, cure disease, make an imperfect union more perfect than it's been. We may come up short, but at our best, we try. My fellow Americans, we're facing formidable enemies. They include not only the coronavirus and the terrible impact on the lives and livelihoods, but also the selfishness and fear that have loomed over our national life for the last 3 years. And I choose those words in Bible, selfishness and fear. Defeating those enemies requires us to do our duty. And that duty includes remembering who we should be. Who we should be. We should be the America of FDR and Eisenhower, of Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King Jr., Jonas Salk and Neil Armstrong. We should be the America that cherishes life, liberty, and courage. And above all, we We should be an America that cheers each other, each and every one of us. You know, we're a nation in pain. We must not let our pain destroy us. We're a nation enraged. We cannot let our rage consume us. We're a nation that's exhausted, but we will not allow our exhaustion to defeat us. As president, it's my commitment to all of you to lead on these issues and to listen. Because I truly believe in my heart of hearts, we can overcome. We stand together, finally as one America, we'll rise stronger than we were before. We'll move that arc closer to justice. We'll reach out to one another. So speak out for one another. And please, please, do what's recently been happening. Take care of one another. This is the United States of America. There's never been anything we've been unable to do when we set our mind to do it, and we've done it together. Together, united. That's who we are at our best. May God bless you all, and may God protect our troops. Thank you.
That was good. That was good. Thank you for watching that with me. That was nice to be able to share. Yes, even though I'm agnostic as well, you better stay alive, Joe. I think some people were a little bit sad to hear me say not only that I was agnostic, but that I effectively renounced my religious and cultural background. Look, I still celebrate Jewish holidays, but it is not something that I make a central part of my life, and it's not something that I can honestly say I subscribe to. And if you were sitting with me, I used to sit next to my grandparents through religious services where they would recite verses about how the righteous will flourish and evil will be cast aside by the Lord. And I would sit there knowing what my grandmother had lived through and knowing that the Holocaust happened and that there was not some protective God who stepped in to prevent any of those deaths. I couldn't philosophically reconcile that to myself. It was too much pain, too much cognitive dissonance for me. I know my grandparents themselves, Holocaust survivors, were able to do that. And that was great, that they had been so enculturated with faith that it could still be a part of their lives, even if some of it maybe didn't stand up on a logical basis. For them, it wasn't the truth of the sayings and the verses. It was just the act of sitting together with people of their background and that unity and that togetherness. But like a lot of people who have one parent from one religious background and another from a different religious background, you don't as easily believe in a one single truth. And it's harder to keep your butt plastered to the pew or to a bench and sit through a religious service that proclaims itself to be a singular truth. So yes. And also, I want more from my religion, and I haven't ever found religion to offer an integrity of principle. I've just still encountered racism and dismissal of the worth of other people that I thought seemed incongruous with religion, with principles, and I couldn't overlook it. You know, if you're steeped in something, it's easier to perhaps overlook the flaws because you are more privy to its benefits and group loyalty. But I'm not, because I'm a child of parents from two different backgrounds. My father is English. His family were Anglican missionaries and colonialists. So sorry for being part of an oppressive or having ancestry for being part of a colonialist system. And I only laugh there because I know it's a stereotype that people on the left are overly apologetic and obsequious about things that they personally aren't responsible for. So yes, I'm not personally responsible for white systems of oppression around the world, but the British people did conquer a lot of nations, and they oppressed them and they starved them and stole from them and looted. Whilst the word looting has a lot of currency, people might not even know, but Winston Churchill himself diverted a lot of the agricultural produce of India to troops, British and Allied troops serving over in the Middle East and elsewhere, and millions of Indians starved to death during that time of World War II. And we don't know it. We don't talk about it in the same way we talk about the millions of deaths in Hitler's death camps. But the leader of the British people fairly directly caused the deaths of millions of Indian people through starvation, which is a horrible way to watch your family and your children die. Thank you. So yes, you don't have to turn your back on God, and I support people's religion, which is why I don't like to say I'm atheist. I like to say I'm agnostic. It feels more respectful to me of acknowledging the fact that other people's beliefs have validity to them, provide a core often that sustains their interest in seeking morality and in seeking and gravitating towards moral pro-social behavior. And I support moral and pro-social behavior above all things. So I don't ever wish to be dismissive or too flippant about other people's religion. I will, of course, laugh at the fact that Donald Trump felt so disconcerted by being repeatedly called a bunker baby and bunker boy on social media that he talked to Putin and that then rolled out military police to tear gas people using their First Amendment rights to peacefully protest against government actions and judicial inadequacies and flat out murder, to protest those things publicly during daytime hours before a curfew, and were nevertheless tear gassed, shot with rubber bullets, and forcibly expelled from a park next to the White House in order to make way for the president to demonstrate his manliness, having had the park cleared to walk through to a church that had been burnt the other day, hold a Bible upside down and back to front for a photo opportunity, and then be applauded by Republican politicians such as Scott Walker for being the bravest. Scott Walker said on Twitter that he was perhaps, there had never been a president so brave. Such bravery to have people shot with rubber bullets and gassed prior to even a curfew coming into play in order to make way to clear his path for him to then stride across and mishandle a Bible, which the bishop of that, what are you a bishop of? The bishop of that territory, that diocese, then said was effectively sacrilegious for him to have misused and abused a Bible in that way, in ways that were antithetical to religious principle of valuing the sanctity of life. He damaged human life. He was hurting people's lungs with the application of tear gas during a time of a pandemic with respiratory as well as cardiac complications. Yes, the bishop of the DC Episcopal Archdiocese was articulate. We might listen to her. Let's have a look. I've got some things bookmarked, I know, so we'll have a little look at some different things. First of all, this is one hero. I promised to look at heroes. This is a man who sheltered protesters in his house who were evacuated from the park and then corralled or kettled into a residential area, and they couldn't escape. And this man opened his door and let 70 of them in his house for safety. Let's listen.
I hope that my 13-year-old son grows up to be just as amazing as they are, and I hope that they continue to fight, and I hope they go out there today peacefully as they did yesterday and not blink, because our country needs them and needs you and everybody more than ever right now.
Rahul, thank you so much for your time.
You know, I hope that my 13.
So he's Rahul. He has a business. I don't remember what it is, but I would certainly support it if I was in Washington, D.C. This is Scott Walker comment. We were just talking about how this photo is ridiculous, but here you have a military general who shouldn't be dressed in military fatigues outside of a combat zone. William Barr, the corrupt attorney general who has helped protect Trump from the consequences of the law. He's shielded Trump from public exposure. He hid portions and continues to hide portions of the Mueller report. And in fact, that's now going to the Supreme Court. His ability to maintain hiding portions of the Mueller report from the Democratic Party. But Scott Walker says hard to imagine any other president of the United States having the guts to walk out of the White House like this, having had his way cleared for him with tear gassing and shooting rubber bullets at people exercising their First Amendment rights. And we can't just say exercising their First Amendment rights. We have to keep explaining basic principles now and saying it's important to be able to protest government policies, because the intoxication of fascism makes a lot of people forget why things were the way they were. And they begin to revel in the gleeful abandonment of those things and to say, doesn't matter. We don't care if you keep telling us that these things are being overturned. We have a new set of guiding principles, and that is all hail President God King Trump, who is now conflated in their minds with America itself. He is the embodiment of America, and that's why it becomes very difficult to challenge a fascist who wraps themselves in a cloak made out of the flag and a cross. Trump today brandished a Bible and pretended this was patriotic, and it remains to be seen how well this message will sell to parts of the American public, because in general, Trump's approval rating is low, which is good. People question his competency, but how much will the footage of looting that some networks concentrate on persuade white Americans that they have to look to Trump to preserve their property, that property rights are the key thing to protect here rather than your democratic rights? And I should remind them, if they were listening, which they're not, but that property rights cannot be protected if you have a fascist government that is lawless. If you allow government to remove accountability, then you may be next. Someone in your family may displease the despot who has dismantled checks and balances and dismantled systems of accountability and oversight. So if you vote for Donald Trump because you think he's the only one who will protect your property from thieves and looters and thugs, then you will find more things taken from you than you ever expected to lose. I said that well. I think I said that well. Yes, the message didn't sell well with the DC Episcopal Bishop. That's true. I'm always most pleased when somebody unexpected becomes an ally, someone who speaks to a demographic that we need on our side. And we need decent religious people to recognize the indecency of Trumpism. And I need a tissue. Oh, got one. Pardon me. Hi, Brian. Okay. Let's keep seeing more messages. Yes, Trump is not sending troops onto the streets to keep the peace. Trump is sending troops onto the streets to keep himself in power. George Floyd's brother made an in-person call for peace on Monday at the site where police killed his brother. But Donald Trump wouldn't mention him. No, he wouldn't give other people credit for making an important call for peace. He wouldn't center anybody's message unless it was somebody who was a lackey to him or prepared to praise him. Because I tire very much of just talking about Trump in terms of mental difficulties, as if he's just a narcissist. This is not just narcissism. This is abuse of power. This is how you build a narrative that lends itself to mass delusion, to groupthink, to a fervent base that doesn't win you an election, but that becomes so devoted to you that they help give you a gloss of legitimacy as you continue to cheat and manipulate and propagandize. So Trump has never really tried that hard to broaden his base or put out a message that has broad appeal. He just likes to feed the strength of attachment of people who already love him. He knows it was enough to give him an electoral college victory narrowly in 2016. So they throw, and the Republicans who are collaborators with Trump brand fascism, the collaborators will continue to try to suppress the vote to keep down the 50% of America, at least, who recognize Trump's degradation of American standards that protect Americans, that keep Americans safe from a corrupt government that can arbitrarily choose to harm people, that can arbitrarily choose to not help people. And that sounds not that bad, but as you can see with the coronavirus, it can kill hundreds and thousands of Americans if you choose to rule in a way, if you choose to exercise your power in a way that doesn't help people. He is failing to help, and Republicans are failing to help people of color. The small business money has been put into systems that are often withheld from African-American businesses. Small African-American businesses are losing money. African-Americans are being disproportionately denied access to healthcare. Black Americans are being disproportionately forced to go to work in their jobs at meat factories, even when conditions are unsafe, because they're disproportionately employed in poorly paid positions. And to have a federal government that refuses to develop a federal plan to help all Americans means some white people are collateral damage, but that he's hoping you will overlook that in favor of celebrating, covertly celebrating the ultimate and massive and broad betrayal of people of color, Black people in America. Okay, this is a scene that was live on Australian television. So we had, I don't watch it, but this is an Australian news channel, popular. They were watching the protest. They had a reporter live on the ground, and this is what happened to her. You can hear the shakiness in her voice. This has got 4.7 million views. So it's good sometimes for Americans to step out and go, yes, how are we being perceived around the world? Australia is a strong ally of America, and this is what Australians were watching today.
The White House, where Donald Trump is about to speak, it's getting a bit tense.
Yeah, absolutely, guys. We've just had to run about a block as police moved in. We've been fired at with rubber bullets. My cameraman has been hit. We've also seen tear gas being used. Here we go, they're moving through again. This is exactly what it looks like. Exactly what it looks like. We're the simply media.
Oh, whoa. Oh.
Amelia, can you hear us?
Amelia, you okay? Or your cameraman? Hello, Amelia. The police just charged Amelia and our 7 News cameraman there, and looks like a policeman just punched our cameraman.
Which is interesting because they're not discriminating between protesters and the media here. Amelia, can you hear us yet?
Amelia, are you there?
Are you okay?
Yes, I am. I am. You heard us telling them that we were media, but they don't care. They're being indiscriminate at the moment. They chased us down that street, as you see. They were firing rubber bullets at everyone. There is tear gas, and now we are really surrounded by the police. And you really saw the way that they dealt with my cameraman Tim. They're quite violent, and they do not care who they're targeting at the moment.
Okay, so that is what Australians were watching. American police just punch a cameraman, and they'd already been shot at with rubber bullets, and just to watch police suddenly, without announcement, just rush forward as well to crowd out the protesters. I think it's important to recognize that the world is watching to a degree aghast, because it's all a continuum. It's all a line of how many excuses do people make for that type of conduct? How many excuses do people make for the continual emergence of stories in the US of African Americans losing their hands at the life of police officers? Do you keep saying to yourself, oh, well, maybe there's white people who also get killed that we just don't hear about? Do you keep saying to yourself, oh, well, all of these people must have deserved to die? Do you keep failing to pay attention to the details of these deaths and say, oh, well, I don't really know what happened, but I assume that everything was as it should be because of normalcy bias? George Floyd's death on camera was a big slap in the face to normalcy bias. It said these things are not normal. And so for all the people who use the word tragic, they're trying to say what a terrible deviation from normalcy. And Black people are trying to say what a piece of evidence to underline the abnormal nature of what we face as we move through this world, the abnormal levels of fear, rational and rational anxiety and rational concern for our lives, for the lives particularly of men in our family, for our husbands, our brothers, our uncles, our children. What an abnormal state of existence that parents must tell their children to warn them to not fall afoul of the law, to not even call the law for help, because you must avoid any encounter with police officers because some of them harbor so much active, angry, and murderous hostility for people of our skin color that they will find an excuse to pretend to have been afraid, but to have us in a dominant position, to not want to give up that position of strength ever, that they're looking for opportunities to put their foot on your neck, their knee on your neck, and squeeze your life out of you, to steal from you, to loot the years that you might have lived with your children and your family. So Persian Chic is bringing up a statistic that 12.6% of Americans are Black, but 26.7% of Americans killed by police are Black. So, oops. This is a police officer. I haven't heard what they have to say. Let's have a listen.
The governors, and some of that audio has come out and we're using it, and in it he says to governors, he says, you're weak. He says, many of you should be, not showing this weakness. We're laughing stocks. You need to dominate. You need to dominate. I want to ask you not to, if you don't want to, comment on the President of the United States, but is the right direction for police today in this environment to go out and dominate and to show that they're quote unquote not weak? What should the police be doing now to calm this terrible situation?
Let me just say this to the President of the United States on behalf of the police chiefs in this country. Please, if you don't have something constructive to say, keep your mouth shut, because you're putting men and women in their early 20s at risk. It's not about dominating, it's about winning hearts and minds. And let's be clear, we do not want people to confuse kindness with weakness, but we don't want ignorance to ruin what we've got here in Houston. And speaking for my colleagues across the country, where their officers are being injured, community members are being injured, if you don't have something to say, like Forrest Gump, then don't say it, because that's the basic tenets of leadership, and we need leadership now more than ever. And it hurts me to no end because whether we vote for someone, we don't vote for someone, it's still our president. But it's time to be presidential and not try to be like you're on The Apprentice. This is not Hollywood. This is real life, and real lives are at risk. And I ask the American people to please join with the police, stand together. Let's shift this to where it needs to be, to the voting booth. Pay attention to the hearts and of the people that we elect. And the reason this stuff happens is because too many people right now in this country that are throwing bricks and damaging property never bother to vote. So you have a choice. Lift up your voice, be heard in the voting booth, and continue to march peacefully. So the focus remains on bad policing, criminal policing. And let's be real honest, this is not just about policing. It's about society and this disproportionality of the things going on in our country, from education to health to food to everything that we all as human beings hold near and dear. So please don't react to that. If we just hug one another, the only thing that will happen to overcome hate is love and engagement. Let's engage and let's do what we can control, which is our own actions, our own hearts, and exercise without fail our right to vote.
And that was great. That was great. I really appreciate what he said, because that was leadership. That Donald Trump is actively endangering young men and women in their 20s whose lives are on the line. And when Trump inflames the situation and makes people feel more anger and more rage because he's provoked protesters by saying that he might start shooting people and that he wants the military to be brought out and the National Guard to be brought out to dominate protesters, which is provocation, which is provoking. It's saying, well, we want to crush your First Amendment rights. He might pretend and say, oh no, I'm just talking about looting, but he's talking about shutting down protest. That's the broader message, is bringing out military, escalating things in order to use tear gas on peaceful protesters in the park, as he did today. And I love what that police chief did as well, because he used The Apprentice. He went back to the source of the original delusion that so many Americans had when they voted for Trump, thinking that he was competent, that the words they heard come out of his mouth sounded like someone who knew about business and people management and a number of things, when they were scripted words made for Trump to read off a teleprompter for a reality television show. And that might be one way to remind people of what their original motivation was before they got caught up in Trumpism, before it became almost religious in terms of its fascistic subservience to the man, the fascistic confusion of Trump with patriotism itself. That if you like the flag, then you like Trump. If you like America, then you like Trump. We have to break down some of that delusion. I mean, more importantly, we have to turn out voters and register voters. But for people on the edge, if we want to peel away some people to come back to sanity, and we need all methods of doing these things, because we need so many people on board to overcome the likely extensive cheating. We need all the determination on board so that if Trump cancels the election, you have a lot of people who were so determined to bring about a change of leadership that they then do something like a general strike or not spending any money, something to respond to an unjustly cancelled election. That police officer did not just talk about property destruction. He talked about the destruction of life. And he didn't just talk about bad police behavior. He did not just minimize it. He said criminal police behavior. He acknowledged that there are crimes that officers of the law have committed, which is so important, because for Black people, they are being gaslit and have been gaslit for years with the pile of excuses and rationalizations for the disproportionate deaths. And if they're just disproportionate deaths, then you can't call them murder. You just go, oh, maybe there's something statistically questionable about this. And you say maybe, and you don't have the urgency and the conviction that you need to make effective change. and people don't hear it in the voice of their leaders, and maybe that doesn't motivate them to turn out at the ballot box because they don't hear it in the community, and then the community doesn't require it of their leaders, and then their leaders don't say the right things. But that we know is changing because people have required that leadership of Joe Biden. The community expressed sentiment. The protesters in the street have helped create and sustain this necessary conversation to say, keep talking about it. Keep talking about how there is a reality for Black people that white people have not seen, that white people have ignored and overlooked and complacently disregarded. And they have brought that pain to us to say, look at the destruction of things and feel that we are responding in a way that we think is commensurate to the devastation wreaked upon our communities. And I'll still separate peaceful protesters still blocking traffic and saying, we are disrupting things to make our complaints known, that there is a systematic wrong that is being committed, that a systematic wrong that needs to be addressed. And that police officer said, it's not just about criminal police behavior, is it? He didn't minimize it, but he did extend it to say it's also about disproportionality in terms of education and food and opportunity. And he referenced those things to say, yes, that anger is because of so much inequality. He expanded our understanding of what racism is. It's not just a word, racism, that you call someone a racist and you decide whether or not you are a racist and you feel good about yourself or bad about yourself as a consequence. It is broader. There is a pattern of systematically subjugating Black people to second-tier citizenship status so that they get less access to relief stimulatory funds for their Black-owned businesses. And people don't complain enough. It's not seen as an urgent enough problem, because we are not sufficiently united as a community for white people to care about what happens to Black people as if they're part of the same family, as if they're citizens of the same nation, as if they are worthy of equal treatment from the government. Somebody made a point that Black people are proxy warriors for the oligarchy. I guess I can understand that argument if you're wanting to say that Trump and the kleptocracy, the theft of America's resources, using stimulatory payments to disproportionately give to wealthy large companies so that their profit is preserved, whilst the profits of smaller businesses is exposed more to the risks of an economy that has been paused for public health measures, or just paused out of an organic public response to a health crisis. But yeah, so I better learn that police officer's name. His name is Art Acevedo. He's Houston Police. He's from and look, his profile picture is George Floyd. That's awesome. He is a great guy from my estimation. At least he's prepared to touch on topics that others do not. I'm proud of him. Okay, everybody, I better get off the computer and go to bed. Thank you for... No, not only God can right this wrong, we can influence each other, and our speech and our actions and our example influences each other. And white people making the effort to empathically engage with what Black people are pointing out that they have suffered, not only today, not only this week, but for a long time. The emotional knee on their neck for so long, the fear and intimidation caused by the knowledge that Black people face potential death at the hands of police officers who can behave criminally towards them, and know that juries will be likely to spin that wheel and say, acquit, acquit, acquit. I'm glad you liked the broadcast, Alan. Thank you for your support. As always, anybody who wants a task, I'm just going to put some tasks out there. You could contact me via direct message to let me know if you want to take on a task. My first task that I'm suggesting is that somebody makes a list of what they think have been Trump's most consequential lies. So to rate that list, to go, I think this has been one of his most significant. You can have ties, it doesn't have to be purely linear, but overall, in a general linear direction, 5 or 10, whatever you could be comfortable with. Because I think it's important to do something that's not just reactive to the news cycle, to look at his background and go, what have been the most consequential lies for the American people? To write something about that. My second task is for people to write a few of their favorite resources. So to look at some of the resources on the internet for places to donate to organizations supporting protesters, and come up with 3 preferred charities that you think you've done a good job of vetting. Jane, so you've tried to DM me. I might not follow you on Twitter. So put a message under this broadcast. If you go to my Twitter page, there'll be a tweet that says, watch this broadcast. And if you tweet underneath that, just to draw my attention to your name, so you can say anything, you can say hello. Draw your attention to your account on Twitter, and I'll follow you back on Twitter, and then you'll be able to direct message me. Yeah, social conditioning is certainly a factor. Lots of people attempted to intervene with George Floyd's murder. Lots of people were standing around begging police to stop, and they were teenagers. They were teenagers begging the police to not kill George Floyd. But there were a lot of police officers who were actively involved in causing George Floyd's death. How does one properly vet a resource? I guess you make an effort to substantiate it in some way. So if they claim to be well supported, you Google their account and see if there's a charity vetting thing. I know that there were organizations that vetted charities like the Clinton Foundation and the Trump Organization, and that the Clinton Foundation had a good charity scorecard and the Trump Foundation didn't. So just to check if there are such ratings that exist for some of the charities that you might see online. And so I'll check, Jane. Maybe I can just try and look you up on Twitter right now to follow you. Is it the same name? Jane CER 0? Oh, there you are. Okay, yes, so you couldn't direct message me because I did not follow you yet, and now I do. Done. Okay, so anything else? Yes, the independent autopsy said that George died from asphyxiation, from deprivation of oxygen to the brain as a consequence of force used on his neck and his back. So the back force compressed George Floyd's lungs. So that might have been from one of the other 2 officers, because we saw one knee of Derek Chauvin's on the ground. So it could be very well another police officer that there's less footage of. There's somebody who walked past, and you saw that 3 officers were kneeling on or on the close to the ground, actively surrounding George's body. And it's been said that one was kneeling or putting pressure on his legs and one on his back. So the person putting pressure on George Floyd's back was also, from the sound of it, actively involved in causing his death. Did you imagine seeing that Barack Obama follows me on Twitter? I think you did, but I'll go check. Because that would be pretty exciting. Yeah, you did imagine it. He doesn't follow me. He does follow 605,000 people. So there's a lot of people who would be very excited to have the honor of Barack Obama following them. Very exciting. No. Somebody's feeling some love, which is sweet. There is no reason to pin a person down the way he was. Yes, I think, a chill when I read someone write that police training specifically stipulates to avoid having people down on the ground with their hands behind their back for more than a moment, because that position in and of itself lends itself to asphyxiation, or to the risk of asphyxiation. So that to even have had George Floyd in that position for 9 minutes, even if nobody had been kneeling on him, would have already been a risk of death. But to have him in that position and then have 3 people applying weight, and one applying weight to his chest and one applying weight to constrict his neck, it's A, a complete contravention of police training, and B, it's murdering someone. And the autopsy suggests that George Floyd did die on camera in front of our eyes, that we didn't just see him pass out, that what many people understood to be true was true, that it was likely he died in those moments, and that Derek Chauvin continued to keep his knee on George Floyd's neck for 2 minutes after he'd in fact died. Yes, lynching, extrajudicial murder is a form of terrorism. If government agents do it, it's worse. Yes, it is an example of extreme betrayal by a society and the systems. For them to have felt so confident in murdering someone on camera, officers of the law committing a very serious crime whilst being observed by members of the public, recorded by members of the public, begged by members of the public not to commit this murder, is such an outrage that means you have conservative people who might usually be making excuses, even denouncing his crime, that crime, that murder, that extrajudicial murder, that lynching. People are denouncing it. They feel that they can't do otherwise. Some are probably more reluctant than others to do it, but they can't help it because public opinion is so affronted by the audacity of that crime and the absolute betrayal of the social contract, that police officers who are there to prevent crime, to protect the public, are murdering a member of the public, criminally murdering a member of the public, purposefully, confidently, and self-assuredly murdering a member of the public, is such an inversion of systems of justice and order that it's not a surprise that there are so many demonstrations, not only in the United States, but across the world. So let's see. I think there's a little bit of footage that I have with footage of people even in Denmark. Oh, this is the Trump's General
freedom to assemble and
Tilly.
speak. That's perfectly fine. We support that. We took an oath of allegiance to the Constitution of the United States of America to do that, to protect everyone's rights. And that's what we do. We've got the DC National Guard out here, and I'm just checking their protesters. What's your message tonight? Just to allow freedom to assemble and freedom of speech. That's perfectly fine. We support.
So he's paying lip service to the freedom to assemble and freedom of speech, but he's wearing military fatigues in an area where people assembled to protest, as if it's a war zone. So we already saw Raoul. We saw the stupid picture of Donald Trump. We saw an Australian journalist get punched. Oh, we'll quickly watch this. This is somebody trying to rip up the street to get bricks, and then the citizens arrest him. So the actual protesters say, hey, he's a white person, trying to make trouble for them. And he loses his hat. He's got white hair. They are citizens arresting him, and they hand him over to police. And he's not going down without a fight. He's trying to drag the other protesters down. That protester is trying to disentangle himself. So luckily, the police recognize that he's separate. There we go. Nearly 12 people have watched that. 12 million people, sorry. So that's nice. That shows protesters who don't support someone purposefully chipping away at the street with what appears to be a pickaxe in order to obtain bricks to smash things with. Citizens arrested him. They tackled him to the ground. He was resisting vociferously, and they handed him over to police. Yes, there's General Milley. Milley? Okay, said he's observing the situation. Oops. Huntington Beach, a George Floyd protest was deemed an unlawful assembly, but a stay-at-home protest 1 month ago was not. So that seems to be a violation of the First Amendment rights of people, that this protest was left undisturbed, these white people saying, reopen California now, but black people can't protest, or black allies can't protest a pattern of injustice and continuing injustice, because the three collaborating police officers should not be roaming the streets free. They should be under arrest. That they aren't yet under arrest shows that the crime is still not being taken seriously enough by authorities, even as people are protesting and demonstrating all over the world. Here is an example of the Los Angeles Convention Center being transformed into a military base because Donald Trump takes property damage more seriously than protecting American lives from a pandemic. So Matthew Cherry points out that it took months to figure out testing centers for coronavirus. And in fact, some people are saying, yes, as recently as last week, they got the ability to test their patients. But here is a fast adoption of a convention center for military repurposing uses. And somebody commented, they can mobilize to kill us, but can't mobilize to help us live, which I thought was a very necessarily profound comment. This is another important comment. The US Constitution doesn't self-activate. The president can get away with literally anything if the other branches don't stop him. So here we see our problem, that it's not just Trump who is corrupted and intent on stealing from the American public, denying the American public the protection of the federal government when it needs protection from the pandemic, when it needs a testing plan, a tracing and isolating plan that would more readily allow businesses to reopen and people to feel safe. Trump won't offer that to the American people, and the Republicans also won't offer that to the American people. Mitch McConnell is still prioritizing the Senate meeting to push through more Trump-appointed judges. And I'm not just going to leave it at that and say judges. Those judges, when in power, make decisions that are against the rights of wage earners. Those Republican-appointed judges, when in power, for years, spend years making decisions that disfavor women, that disfavor people of color, that disfavor people who earn money and try to sue gun manufacturers or sue their employers for unsafe conditions or sue people for discriminating against them on the grounds of gender or race. And that is what it means when McConnell prioritizes the Senate meeting for that and refuses to allow the Senate to meet and pass legislation to reduce the detrimental impact of the spiraling economic crisis that is besetting America. Republicans are embracing and exacerbating and accelerating crises on a number of fronts, and they have to be held accountable, not just Trump. They're not just spineless, they are actively, hostilely working against the interests of the American people on multiple fronts. And when it's not talked about and it's not addressed, that is inadvertently giving them permission to continue that work of peeling apart America and the hard-won rights of American workers and the hard-won rights of American women and the hard-won progress in relation to civil rights. Then they get more judges who do things like roll back voting rights, Supreme Court judges who roll back decisions to help more people get access to the vote, more people to get access to the power that is contained in the system of voting. Here's a Fox News contributor complaining that allegations of Russian involvement in the George Floyd uprisings are undermining our bilateral relationship with Russia. And somebody pointed out that, yes, Russia is not a bilateral relationship. It's not a relationship with any degree of equality. It's the US's 37th largest trading partner, whose per capita income is currently dropping below India's. Not to be rude about India, but just Russia's not very significant in an economic sense.
Is there a history of doing things like this? And is there a danger of someone with that type of resume throwing it out there if it's unfounded?
I think that we need to rely on our own government and keep in mind the United States intelligence community. Our government has not discussed this issue whatsoever. And I think if Russia were interfering in our domestic politics, they would be doing that. But they're not. And it's important not to let the instigators of this violence off the hook as if they're easily manipulated by Russian foreign influence. And there is a danger. We have a bilateral relationship with Russia. The president is trying to iron out economic deals, and we've got the Open Skies Treaty that we are now pulling out of and maybe seeking to renegotiate a new start. All of these things it's particularly unhelpful when a former senior official makes these sort of unfounded claims.
Exactly.
All right, so yes, don't be so mean to Russia. It's a bilateral relationship, except that it's not really. It's just bilateral at the moment because the current president, is beholden to Russia. And so a lot of conservative pundits are also likely to be beholden to Russia. They have a coalition of the indecent, of the corrupt, of the venal, who are seeking to favor themselves as if they are an elite ruling class that needs to be allowed to get away with cheating. Okay. Oh, they've linked an article to a page about protests that Russian agents sponsored, 2 competing protests in order to inflame anxiety and thereby influence the 2016 election. A Russian Facebook page organized a protest in Texas. A different Russian page launched the counter-protest. So newly released Facebook ads showed 2 Russian-linked Facebook groups organizing opposing protests last year at the same time outside an Islamic center in Houston. So trying to organize civil conflict. So United Muslims of America, a Facebook page organized by Russian people, and then the Heart of Texas that says Texas, homeland of guns, barbecue, and your heart, and has memes that say things like time to secede. And they organized a protest on May the 21st called Save Islamic Knowledge. Yeah. Wow. And that would have brought legitimate Americans out into the streets because Facebook's good at doing that. So the competing protest was called a noon rally to stop Islamification of Texas. And a separate Russian-sponsored group advertised a Save Islamic Knowledge rally for the same place and at the same time. So yes, for anybody who thinks that Russia is not also trying to sponsor people to increase public fear and public discord, will also be kidding themselves. Even Napolitano says that the other 3 officers should be charged as accomplices to first-degree murder. That's good. Dang it. You didn't hear that. Oops. It's a good comment. He's
result in guilty pleas to second-degree
okay.
murder.
Sorry.
What is next in the case against the police officers in Minneapolis, Judge?
Well, I think that there's a case here for first-degree murder. First-degree murder requires intent to kill, obviously that's there, and a planning and plotting to do so. That intent and the planning and plotting can arise in the mind of the killer during the crime. So where the police officer here, former Officer Chauvin, was choking and torturing George Floyd for 8.5 minutes, and one of his colleagues said, don't you think this has gone on long enough? And he said, no. He obviously was planning and plotting to kill George, and he continued to do so. In fact, as we know, his knee was on the neck for the last 2 minutes while he was already dead. So he should be charged with first-degree murder. The other cops should be, it's beyond me, they haven't been charged. They should be charged with as being accomplices for first-degree murder because they have the duty to prevent crime, and they didn't do anything to stop Chauvin from killing George Floyd. These first-degree murder charges would probably then not result in a trial. They'd result in guilty pleas to second-degree murder, and the case will be gone.
Let's talk.
I didn't expect to hear something that I would agree with from Fox News, but I know Judge Napolitano is rumored for at least occasionally subscribing to something that makes logical sense. So thank you for being a vehicle for delivering some facts to Fox News viewers. That facts point to mens rea, a guilty mindset in Derek Chauvin's head, because he was challenged on what he was doing by a fellow police officer. I hadn't heard that, who said, don't you think this has gone on for long enough? And that Judge Napolitano referred to what happened as torture, that he was torturing George Floyd by putting him in that position of fighting for his life for as long as he was, that he could feel his life slipping away. It is torturous to be restrained when you can feel yourself losing your life and you can't fight to protect yourself. Your whole body would be screaming, let me live, fight for me, fight to live. That's what people do when they're under duress. They want to struggle and move, but he was prevented from moving at all. To be held down as your life is draining from you is an act of torture, and I'm so glad he raised that. I haven't heard many other people mention that point, that it's not just a murder. He wasn't just shot. He was tortured for 9 minutes before his death. Or at least, yes, for a long period of time, because for 2 minutes of that kneeling, George Floyd was already dead. And Napolitano said that as if, yes, it's just a fact on the table to be accepted in general. So important to hear that even on Fox, they're getting access to that idea of George Floyd's murderer, principal murderer, should be charged with first-degree murderer, and the other 3 accomplices should at least be charged with being accessories to murder, to first-degree murder, and then maybe they can just plead guilty to second-degree murder, because they're charged with preventing crimes, and they instead enabled a crime to occur. I'm not seeing any comments right now, so I hope this is still working. But we'll see. Okay. No, they allow occasional dissenters because that helps fuel people's conviction that they are watching a legitimate news source. So they do occasionally have real facts. They just make sure they crowd out those real facts with a very thorough, hypnotic amount of propaganda and lies. But the occasional dissent allows people to get riled up and say, Judge Napolitano, today I hate you. Trump knows that when he rails against Fox News, that the viewers won't really turn away from Fox News. It's a self-reinforcing loop of mutual delusion. People are happy that today there was some hashtags calling out companies that have donated to Trump's campaign. I hope we all listen and stop supporting them until they make a change, adding on to the Wendy's is over party. So here, look, there's a lot of companies that have donated to Trump's. If anybody wants to look into this, obviously, yes, Kushner Companies, that's part of Trump's campaign. Bed Bath & Beyond, how could you? New Balance, Miller Coors, 6pm.com, Marshalls, Blue Fly, Burlington, Hudson's Bay & Co., Nordstrom, Hobby Lobby, Perfumania, Amazon. These are lots of companies. So that's important. That could be a third task, Persian Chick, for anybody to look into it and just check. Just Google list of donors to Trump and see if they can come up with a link that maybe validates a lot of assertions in that meme. Thank you. So it is important to do that, to try and exercise consumer power, to reject people who support Trump. Here is the footage of a helicopter flying low over Chinatown, military helicopters, sending gusts of dust into the air. Part of a tree fell, hitting near passerbys. The crowds dispersed and some storefronts were shattered. So we'll have a little look at that. Oh, so noisy. Okay. We'll see the next. Oh. Okay, I think I'm done for the evening. Thank you so much for being with me today. And if you can think of any tasks to add to a list for the most devoted of us who are still on this broadcast, even after an hour and 51 minutes, Lordy. Thank you, Persian Chick. I realized, sometimes I think, if my aim is to build a bigger audience. I've had a fairly consistent sized audience for at least the last year. Occasionally it's more people, but depending on what title I use, but it's fairly consistent. So I thought I could see it as failure if I'm not massively increasing my audience. But at the same time, you don't have to have a big audience to be significant. You just have to have things that are motivating. You just have to have leadership. So I thought, do not evaluate self on those type of measures. I still feel proud and privileged to have the audience that I do have, the gang of people who glean value from what I say and come back here night after night, provide encouragement and say that they've found something of value, and that we can keep pressing forwards with ways to keep using this group and keep using the energy that we have and the commitment that we have to justice and to providing a counteractive force to the forces that are destabilizing or disestablishing democracy. It was a fight to establish democracy and to make it more extensive, to have Black people in the United States qualify to even vote. That was a fight. And this is just another fight to undo the disestablishment effort that Trump has put in to undermining the democracy that was so hard won, to take power away from people, to take First Amendment rights away, to make sure that corruption can flourish unchecked in the United States government. People already knew the government wasn't perfect, and they already were quite cynical about politicians of all stripes. But now we really have to work on being more specific, point out that there's a hierarchy of wrongdoing and criminality, and the things that Trump has done to betray America have to be placed in their proper position at the top of that pile, and just block or discount or mute people who continue to claim that Biden is equally bad for America. Those people are such time sucks, and their attitude is so poisonous and toxic to democracy, because people need to fight to get back even what was had, but can use that forward momentum to improve America, to push for a more perfect union, as Joe Biden said, to push for legislation that takes action on a lot of fronts of injustice, of unjust inequality of access to education, unjust equality of access to stimulus federal funds, inequality, the injustice of unequal access to healthcare, so that he wants to make Obamacare universal across America so that everybody has access to healthcare. The last task was to look into that post of names of Trump donors, or to just find some names of companies that that donate to Trump, so that we can easily circulate it together. I mean, maybe somebody's written a news article about it, just maybe one or two sources for news organizations that actually have identified current donors, so that we can feel more confident in calling for people to divest from those companies, to not buy products associated with Trump donations. You're welcome. Thank you for compiling the tasks. If you want to send me a list of those tasks, so I can, or put it in a tweet, and then anybody, I could put it below the broadcast, or you could put it below the broadcast. There's an original tweet that comes out from my account, just a one-off, that always has this broadcast on it. And people can retweet that. I think that helps. And post below it with articles they think are relevant, just to make that tweet, that link to this broadcast in its entirety, that could make it a resource each day to go back to that specific tweet that says this is the broadcast, and have relevant articles or sources relating to tasks, such as identifying companies that donate to Trump in a sizable way, or letters that people have written that they want to share with others, that they're proud of, and lower the bar for being proud of your efforts. Lower the bar. Make it easy for yourself to write a letter and go, I did something good. I did something that's worth emulating. Make sure you don't hold yourself to too exacting a standard for writing a letter. Don't be afraid of grammatical error. Democracy is on the line. People's lives are on the line. We are dealing with literal Nazis now, so shut your inner Nazi, grammar Nazi up. Grammar Nazi. Do not be too hard on yourself. Be easy on yourself, because all of our voices are needed, and all of our efforts to promote justice, all of our civic understanding is required, because people have to go back to basic principles to remember what is worth defending about American systems of governance and about American principles, and the principles that originally sought to reduce harm to African Americans, to give them the vote so that they could have some participation of power and governance and not be marginalized. That they could be invited into the tent of people who vote, who wield power, whose opinion therefore has consequence, who can work together as a voting bloc, and therefore exclude people who seek to harm them, or to exclude them from benefits and exclude them from opportunities to have social mobility, to have access to education, to have access to benefits. Thank you. Recommendation, look up the Equal Justice Initiative. Okay. Equal Justice Initiative. All right. Thanks, chaps. Let me play some music. Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. I will play you some of my standard goodbye music. See everyone. Thank you, Persian Chick. Thanks for your encouragement. Take care, everybody. That's my brother playing. I'm proud of him. Good night, Brian. Thanks. Everyone, take care of yourselves and each other. Bye. Good night, Alan. Good night, Paul. Thank you, Huey and Sheldon.